Hi friends, it's Lathia from Farmview Creators, and I just recently finished up this gorgeous Americana Spiral Barn Quilt. These are some timestamps that you might be interested in, and let's get started. So first I get my aluminum composite boards from Piedmont Plastic. They have locations all across North Carolina and possibly other states. You take off the protective covering, and then I am just giving it a light sanding with 80 grit sandpaper. This is just to give the paint something to adhere to, and I'm going to go in with KILZ Mold and Mildew. You can use any kind of KILZ. This is just to prime the board again so that the paints will stick nicely. And I'm just giving it a good coat all over, trying to be fairly even. I accidentally stepped in an anthill while I was doing this. And I am wearing my walking apron. And here we are getting ready to get everything. I used twistable crayons or erasable colored pencils to draw out my barn quilts. And I have already printed off several versions of this and drawn out my own and kind of labeled what colors I want. So I'm going to start by marking the diagonals. I'm using two different colors, one color for the diagonals and then another color for just splitting it in half both directions. So when you are marking your diagonals, you want to really make sure that your ruler is lined up corner to corner and that it does not slip while you are drawing your line. So you want to hold it nice and steady, and again, make sure that you are getting it lined up perfectly. So then I am marking the halfway point on all four sides, and then I'm going to line up my ruler, and this is a 5-foot ruler, by the way, with those hash marks and draw my vertical and horizontal halfway marks. Again, you want to make sure that you have it lined up, and I do use a different color for those lines than I did the diagonals. Now, I'm talking to myself and I'm doing math. I am an English teacher, not a math teacher. So I had to talk it out, and I am marking my board in the intervals that I want. This is a star-based pattern, so you have to mark off from your diagonals and your horizontal and vertical lines instead of drawing a grid. So I wrote them out so I wouldn't have to be calculating so carefully and counting inches on the other diagonal. So I just lined up my center point with the center point of the board, and I am marking all those across all of the lines, all of those hash marks. And I'm just putting a tiny little hash. Not big at all. And now I'm labeling my corners just because for this pattern, you're going to connect lines. So it's like every other line gets connected. So you'll see I'm taking the two diagonals on the right and left and lining up the hash marks on them, and then drawing my lines out to the edge of the board, not crossing that center line. And then I rotate and I do the same thing until I have the whole thing drawn out. So here you can see exactly where I'm lining up, and I'm drawing out from that. And as you go, you'll see where your diamonds start forming. And I'm just checking off as I am finishing connecting places. I just check that off of my list. I am a type A personality, and I like lists and checklists. It helps me stay organized. So here you can see how on the right hand side it is starting to form those diamonds, and on the left it just looks like straight lines. But as I work my way around, again, I am connecting the diagonals with my ruler and then drawing outward lines toward the edge of the board. And as I go around each time, you'll see more and more of the diamonds forming. I just love this pattern. It's probably the most complex pattern that I've done so far, or at least the most complex on a 4 foot by 4 foot board. I've done some sunflowers on smaller boards that were pretty complex, but I think it was worth it. It turned out so gorgeous. So just going around and repeating it. It took me probably about an hour to draw it out. And then there's one where I colored in, just trying to figure out where I wanted my colors. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to label each color on this board. So I have 3 reds, 3 blues, a white, and a gray. So for the reds, I put R1, R2, R3, and then blues, B1, B2, B3. Grays were G, white was W. And I just went around and made sure that I knew exactly what color each of the diamonds needed to be. A lot of times I do not do this, but for this one, just because of the way it was spiraling, just made me feel better to have it labeled up so that I wouldn't make any mistakes. And I did try to change my colors based on what color it was going to be. Again, I'm type A. I like things to match too. So there you can see all of it. And now I'm getting ready to tape. I did on the lighter colors, I tried to erase the color pencil marks that I had made, and I am taping just right along that line that I drew, and anywhere where the corners had a gap, I don't want paint to go across. So I just added a little reinforcement, and there I'm just moving on to the next triangle. And even though those pieces of tape are overlapping and you can see that the diamond is not perfect, it'll be okay. I'll show you how to fix that. When I first started, I would not tape up anything that was going to overlap, even if it was the same color. I would do that on another round of taping after it had dried. But I have been watching Talara Parrish from Barn Quilt headquarters in Western North Carolina, and she has lots of tips and tricks. She's where I get most of my knowledge on how to paint barn quilts, from her and from my sister-in-law at Row 12 Creations. So I'm just erasing those lines and taping up. It's repetitive and takes a while. Probably a good 20 minutes to tape up, and then maybe 5 to cut out. So I'm just making sure that I have these lined up the way they're supposed to be. And you want to use one piece of tape. You don't want to have to overlap the tape on one line. And you want to make sure you burnish it, so rub it in really good. You can see me doing that right there. As I'm also erasing pencil marks, I'm burnishing, and I am using a foam polymer eraser. I believe it's Prismacolor brand from Amazon, and getting up all of the lines, especially for the white, which is what I'm going in. Now I'm going to go in with a, I don't know what it's called, my little knife thing, and I'm using a small metal ruler to lay it across the edge of the tape and then cut away and then carefully pull it up. And I will use my weeding tool when I need to. And those points where I've just cut, I make sure that I press them down very carefully to make sure that they adhere. And now you can see the perfect diamonds appearing. And I save those little scraps of tape because I will use them to, and I'd forgotten to tape up that one diamond, so that's why I had to do that real quick. But I save those pieces to use when I think that I might color outside the lines, I guess, with my paint. So I'm just laying the metal ruler across the edge, making sure it lines up perfectly, and then cutting. And I like to use the Prudy brand paintbrushes, and I am using an additive that makes the paints more smooth. I also use Valspar indoor sample paints. Even though it's indoor, it's going to be wonderful. It's weird, but the indoor paints don't fade as fast as the outdoor. Not sure why. You would think it'd be the opposite, but this color is called Creamy by Valspar. And I'm running my brush along the edges of the tape. I use frog tape, and it has a technology where once you rub across, it locks the tape down on the surface. And then you always try to paint away from the edges of the tape. And I am very, very, very careful on those edges that I cut, and it's just those small little tips. And I try to be very mindful of not painting where they're going to curl up. Your first layer, you want to go very thin. Just trust the process. I wrap my paintbrush in a Clorox wipe and put it in a Ziploc bag between coats. Let it dry completely. If you don't let it dry completely, you don't really know if you need another coat. Some people say they pull their tape when it is slightly damp, but I do not. I go with Talara's advice, and I let it dry completely, and then I pull my tape because I want to make sure that I don't need another coat. This Creamy only took 2 coats, but I didn't know that, so I wrapped up my paintbrush. But now it's all dry, and I'm going to pull my tape. I'm going to go very carefully. I'm going to hold my hand close to the board and pull at a 45-degree angle. And I try to rub the corner of the tape to get it rolling, to get it pulled off. I don't like to use my weeding tool because eventually there's going to be paint where the tape is, and I don't want to nick the paint. But these pieces I am throwing straight away. I am not trying to save those. I have this on a Lazy Susan board so that I can just roll it around as I need it. I think I showed you earlier, but I forgot to mention it. It just makes life easier. I'm trying to get all of those pieces up. And again, pulling at a 45-degree angle close to the board. And if you're not sure, go slow. All right, so when you tape your second layer and you're taping over top of a section you have already painted, you want to see a small edge of the color you've already done. That way you know you will not have a gap that shows the board between your colors. So that's my big piece of advice. Is it easy? No. Should you do it? Yes. I still had some places where you could see a tiny white line between, but I really, really, really try my best to have just a little bit of that previous color showing. And you'll see I'll even pull up tape and reposition it when I don't feel like it's enough. But that way you don't have to touch up any cracks between colors. So for the gray, again, it's a lighter color, so I am trying to erase where I labeled the colors. I'm just going around and getting all of that taped up. And then I will go back and I will cut away the pieces that overlap, where the colors overlap. I'm just burnishing with my eraser and erasing away some of those lines. And again, I use little pieces of tape at the top if I feel like I don't have enough tape to cover. And you can see my puppies are visiting me. I'm in the garage, so it was kind of cool, and they wanted to be with me. They are my Velcro dogs. I even put one of their beds out there so they could chill with me. And I'm just cutting away all that tape, making sure that I burnish down those tiny little points between the diamonds. Now I'm going to go in with Rocky Shelter. This one took 2 layers Again, it is a Valspar indoor paint. I am using a 1-inch brush for this. I have a 1.5. I have several 1.5s, but they were too wide. I also like the Project Source brushes from Lowe's Hardware. That is our local hardware store, and by local I mean 30 minutes away. And so it's already totally dried, and I'm putting on my second coat. I will let that dry completely before I try to pull up tape. Throughout this process, I probably got one color finished each day because I do work a full-time job, and the weather was not my friend. It was very humid, and the humidity really slows down the paint drying. So now I am going ahead and taping another spot while that second coat of gray is drying. I purposely chose a row that was not going to overlap with the gray except in the center star. And I just taped everything but that center star in preparation. Just trying to do something while the paint is drying and while I'm waiting. And of course, paint dries slower when you're waiting for it to dry. So I'm getting all the tiny little ones across because this one does spiral off the board. I have seen some spiraling stars where it doesn't spiral off the board. They just go a couple of rounds out and then stop, and it's still a star. But I liked the one where it kind of threw the stars out across the board and off the board. So there you can see how I left where it was going to overlap with that gray that's still drying. I left that open. So I am cutting away and getting all those little overlapping spots. And after it dried, I did that last one, and now it's time to paint. So this color is beautiful. It is called Skyscape, and it was a very lovely color. I got it brand new for this barn quilt, and I'm very pleased with how it looks. My other colors are about a year old, and I feel like that might be why later you'll see that I had several touch-ups, and they were especially on the colors that were older. The new colors that I got just for this board did not have to have as many touch-ups. So I found that very interesting. So once that was all dry, just pulling it up, going close to the board at a 45-degree angle after it is totally dry. And then I'm taping the next color. Again, when you tape right against a color you've already painted, you want to show just a little edge of that paint inside what you're taping up to paint next. And this process is very redundant, but it is what it is, and it's worth it, I promise. It's just cutting away those edges. In that little corner, I was struggling with exactly how did I need to cut it away? So it took a little bit of thought. Getting all of that done so I can get started on the next color. Making sure all of it's flat. And anytime I use red, I do a base coat of Tinsel Beam. This is just a slightly blue-gray. It's very light. In fact, it almost looks white, but it is not. I did a base coat for all of my reds and for my darkest blue. It helps the red show through the way it should without having to do so many layers. But I will tell you, on this darkest red, it took 4 coats of paint. Red has to be extra. It is a tough color. It's beautiful and I love it, but you have to trust the process when you're doing reds. It takes a lot of super thin coats to get it to be nice and even. So again, even with that base coat of Tinsel Beam, I had to do 4 layers of the Heirloom Red. And it was over the span of 2 days. In fact, I think I got up and went out there and painted before work one morning. And now I finally got it, and I am pulling that up. I am using my weeding tool just a little bit on some of the edges that are not painted, but on those outside edges against the Skyscape, I am not using my weeding tool because I do not want to scratch up that beautiful blue. And I loved how it was turning out. Moving right along to the next color. And there are 8 colors in this, so lots and lots of taping, lots of cutting, lots of painting, especially having 3 shades of red. It was a lot. On average, I do 2 coats of paint, but with reds, it was 2, 3, and 4 for this one. The darkest one was 4, the middle was classic red, and it was 3, and the lightest red was red Bliss, and it was 2. So this is Peekaboo Blue. Again, I love this color. It is my favorite color is royal blue, so I feel like this is pretty close to that. I took 2 coats of this one, letting it dry completely between coats, and letting it dry completely before I tried to pull up the paint or the tape. I didn't want to pull up the paint. And then I started like I did earlier, and I was taping up a different color that didn't overlap except in that center star, and I just left that piece the way it was. And I had my niece with me on this day, and she was helping me out, checking out what I was doing, giving me some advice, because she's 8 and thinks she knows everything. So again, I just left the pieces that would overlap until after that Peekaboo Blue was totally dry. Then I pulled up the ones that were right there, and I went ahead and started cutting away and painting before I even pulled up the tape for that second blue. Just, again, to have something to do while the paint was drying. So another red, that meant another layer of Tinsel Beam. And this just helps the color be smooth and even. And painting on that classic red. It's gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And it took 3 coats of the classic red. So while that classic red is drying, I am pulling up the tape around the Peekaboo Blue. I would also go inside and work on a wood kit from the Rust Covered Cottage by Christina, or read a book, or do my devotional, all those things. So getting that second layer on there. Finally, after 3 layers, pulling that up. Each color just made me fall more and more in love. So at this point, 2 more colors, 1 blue and 1 red. The lightest red and the darkest blue. So the lightest red is a color called Red Bliss, and it was, again, a new color that I got just for this board particularly. I had another red, but my husband and I felt like it was too burgundy. But I'm glad I got new colors because they did work better. I'm not saying I'm going to get rid of my older colors after a year because I don't want to be wasteful, but I am going to be mindful that they may need more touch-ups. So again, even with the lightest red, I'm going in with a coat of Tinsel Beam. Super, super thin because it's just a base coat. And then going in with this red. Beautiful, beautiful. And at this point in the week, which this took about 2 weeks, it was warmer. The humidity had decreased, so the paint was drying more quickly. There I am in my Star Wars pajamas painting right before I go to bed. I'm giving you glimpses every once in a while. And again, I'm taping up the next color before I even pull off the red Bliss while it is drying because I'm very impatient and I need something to do while the paint was drying. And then when I took off that center point tape, then I taped up for that color, which again needed a coat of Tinsel Beam. This one is going to be Enchanted Navy. And it is a gorgeous, gorgeous color. If you see X's on my lids, that just means that I do have another jar of it already purchased. That way I know when I start getting low whether or not I need to grab another one. With this Enchanted Navy, even with the base coat, it took 2 coats, and I'll be honest, because I already had a thin base coat, I went thicker on both of the layers of the Enchanted Navy. There I am again in my PJs, painting away in the garage. Then I'm going to let that dry. And while it's drying, I'm going to go ahead and tape up or pull up the tape for my red Bliss. I just had an Amazon box there as my trash can. Just throwing that tape in there. And I would sometimes forget to take off the tape of those tiny, tiny triangles because it would get completely covered with the paint that went out of the lines. And then when I was doing touch-ups and trying to get totally finished, I realized that there was a tiny little triangle I didn't even paint. So now that navy is finished, and I'm super excited to see it revealing itself as I take off this tape. It was just so gorgeous, and I loved how it turned out. But you can see right there between the Peekaboo Blue and the Enchanted Navy, there was a spot that when I pulled up my tape, it pulled up a little bit of the paint. So I'll just go through and do touch-ups for that, and I'll show you how to do that too. And there it is before touch-ups, and you can see I think I actually got some blood on it and it didn't wipe off. So I'm just getting some hazy dark spots or where I dripped a drop of paint, and there you can see some spots where the paint pulled up, and I just kind of put a little tape, and then I use a fine tip brush to paint over. And now I'm going to seal. I keep my sealing supplies in a Loctite bucket, and I do not rinse them between. And this is just a Cabot 4.5 inch paint stain sponge, and I am dipping it in my Valspar urethane clear satin water-based sealant. It must be water-based. The oil-based will yellow your barn quilt. Water-based only. And then as it dries, which is about 2 hours, I did about 2 hours between, I would come back, do another layer, put some saran wrap over everything while I was waiting for it to dry so that it didn't dry out, and just going in the same direction every single time for the first 2 layers, and then I turned the board a quarter turn and did 2 layers the other way, and there is the gorgeousness. Thank you so much for sticking with me and watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll like and subscribe. Bye.